Welcome to ThePrint. The much awaited and much controversial Bihar caste survey numbers are finally out. According to the survey, OBCs and extremely backward classes form 63% of the Bihar population. But the journey of this survey wasn't exactly smooth. In fact, it faced a legal challenge in the Patna High Court, and the matter is currently pending in the Supreme Court. And one of the major opposition against this survey is that the Bihar government, whether the Bihar government has the power to conduct such a survey. While the question will be considered by the Supreme Court, and we leave it to the Supreme Court to consider, in this episode of Laws of the Land, we'll be talking about the activity of conducting a census and the Census Act 1948. For this episode, you have me, Apoorva Mandhani. We have with us Bhadra, Sinha, and we have with us Supreme Court lawyer Nipun Saxena, who you've seen on this show before. Thank you so much for joining us, Nipun.
It's always a pleasure coming back.
So Nipun, let's start directly and talk about the Census Act 1948. But before you explain the provisions about the law, could you tell our viewers whether any similar law existed before the independence, in the pre-independence era of our country?
Right. I mean, so the earliest evidence of any census ever having been undertaken features in Kautilya's Arthashastra.
Okay,
So he
that's
said that
interesting.
there was census which was being carried out. In fact, he said that in order to effectively implement the economic policies that the state has for its citizens, it is very necessary to have a census.
Right.
Now, that census will lay a blueprint, as if it were, for future policies, keeping in mind the target beneficiaries. And so, therefore, that model was replicated by the Gupta dynasty and also by Gautami Putra Satkarni.
Okay.
And it was very later on that Akbar also
Okay.
implemented the same census provisions. Now, of course, the schemes would vary, the target audiences would vary for that, or the target beneficiaries rather would vary, but the act of conducting a census was always happening. In 1800, when England started it, that was the very first time that India too started it, being a British dominion of the time. But in India, it was in a staggered format. The first known in the city of Calcutta was carried out by none other than Sir James Princip,
Okay.
and that was somewhere in 1827. Thereafter, in 1830, they decided to have a proper census of some of the parts which were within the annexation of the British India.
Is that when this activity was actually called census?
Yes.
Okay.
The word was
The word census, yeah.
always the nomenclature was called census. Now, of course, I don't recollect the equivalent Sanskrit.
Yeah, of
Right,
course.
right,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that was what it was. Now, incidentally, what happened was that during the time of the first war of revolution in 1857, census was halted. Otherwise, it was what you call a 5-year, half a decade, quinquennial sort of a census which was being carried out. It was only in the year 1872 that they decided to have the present format, which is called a decadal census.
Decadal census, yeah.
Now, that decadal census started in 1872 and continued to take place until the year 1941. Now, 1941 was halted because India was also involuntary participant in World
World
War,
War, yeah.
and therefore it was becoming very difficult for the British to carry that census out. But I think 1872 census assumes considerable importance because it was at that time that at the tremendous cost of 42,000 pounds, the entire census was carried out for 23 crore population that existed then.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
And it was also that particular census which had a caste-based questionnaire which was supplied.
That was the first one.
That was the first one.
Okay.
And in fact, it divided the Hindus into 17 different castes, where they said that Brahmins composed of the predominant portion of the society that existed then, with over 1.1 crore, followed by Kshatriyas, Rajputs. In fact, it is so interesting, that particular census, that it also gave a certain list of questionnaires to the participants. Women were incidentally not asked about their occupation because it was presumed that there were no
Right.
Okay.
no women was
Work, yeah.
working at the point of time, and there was a protest, and therefore they had to give an entire justification as to why women were not incorporated
Okay.
in
That's
the
interesting.
census. Also, very interestingly, the then census had also accounted for a different religion. I mean, say for instance, Buddhists were added as casteless category of individuals because because of course Gautam Buddha himself renounced
That's
any
right.
such,
Any such,
suggestions
yeah.
towards caste.
Yeah.
But Sikhs, although they have renounced castes, were taken to be a separate religion rather than being merged within Hindus.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Jains were not given any prominence in the 1872.
So it was
census.
a caste census as well a religious census. Is
Absolutely.
it so?
It seemed like one.
Okay. And was this activity under the specific law at that point of time, or did they follow any British law?
There was no law
Okay.
as such. There was, and it was for the purpose of better administrative efficacy.
Okay. Okay.
So when James Prinsep decided to carry that out, there was of course one regulating circular. But
Okay.
that was that.
Executive order,
It
maybe,
was,
probably.
yes,
Yeah.
at the highest it was the nature of an executive order, but there was no specific act, so to say, that was implemented or by extension applied to the Dominion of India.
So till 1941, this kind of census activity was taking place after every 10 years.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It was only then in somewhere in 1946
Yeah.
that they decided to have a specific committee by Philip Bohr, who decided to give what you call the present act its form. Although, again, interestingly, the reason why this committee was appointed was to find out the lacunae in healthcare.
Okay.
Because people could not identify why there was, let's say, a comorbidity rate. Why would certain individuals not live beyond a certain period of time?
Right.
Let's say, explaining instances of, say, infanticide or female feticide.
Okay.
So it wasn't or let's say outbreak of plague, which happened in very late in India in the 1890s, and therefore they wanted to account for the sudden drop in population or sudden
Right.
sudden increase in population. And therefore what they did was that he came out with a volley of suggestions. It's a 2-volume report, covers about 1300 pages. It calls for an establishment of a national of a registrar general of census,
Okay.
who would be a minister or equivalent to the rank of a minister, or would work under the aegis of the health ministry. Now, when the union government received those recommendations, it said that all right, while so far as the objective is laudable, we don't want him to work under the aegis of the health ministry.
Okay.
Let's bring him under home ministry.
Okay.
And therefore, the registrar general, as you see today,
The one who conducts
the one
or
who
orders
conducts
the
the census, who is also an employee of the central government and has almost 34 directorates functioning all over India with 15 departments. Specific departments ranging from socio-economic to, say, in the modern day and age, the information technology department, which oversees the entire process or digitization of that process rather.
Right.
So in the present form, the genesis is owed to those censuses in part and to the committee report.
So now you spoke about we having a caste census at some point in the past. Why did we stop that activity? How did we come to there?
Right. So it was very interesting because one of the recommendations in that report, and which was also agreed to by everybody, was that India at some point of time has to achieve the objective of being a casteless society, where caste-based dynamics do not have any function to play, because that is generally seen to be antithetical to the progress of any nation. And so it was decided to discard the particular question on caste. So if you look at any caste-based any census
Right.
from 1951 till the present date, you would see that it does not feature a question of caste of a particular individual.
Right. But it continues to feature a question on religion. So
Yes,
religion-based
that is.
survey continues in our country, but caste-based survey was given away.
Was given up. In fact, something very important which is to be placed here is that whether you are a member of SC, ST, OBC community,
Yeah.
that question can be asked.
Okay.
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 But which particular caste which falls within the SC or the ST or the OBC, that you cannot ask.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
because many a times what happens is that certain castes may be recognized or notified as falling within, say, SC bracket or
list,
OBC
yeah.
bracket in one state, whereas the same caste may not fall within the other
Right.
bracket. So, for that limited extent, if the answer to the SC, ST, OBC question is yes, then you have to mention the caste in that simpliciter format. So
Okay.
as to so that the agencies can appreciate whether you are a member in fact of that SC that you're purportedly claiming to be or not.
But the final result, of course, does not give out numbers on
Absolutely,
caste.
it does not. It will only say that this percentage is an SC, this percentage is ST, or this percentage is OBC, and they leave it at that.
So basically, that is the difference between the activity in the pre-independence era and post-independence after the 1948 Act came into being.
That's right. So if you look at the 1872, it was in many aspects deplorable. In fact, there was a full round of debate that happened in Britain over the caste-based census which was being carried out in British times. It was
Okay.
in fact perceived to be a very regressive fashion of conducting a census.
Okay.
And therefore, when the Constitution of India came into picture, you would see that the power to carry out census was exclusively given to the central government, and therefore you would see that entry 69 of list 1, which only recognizes census, was the prerogative, in fact a statutory obligation of the central government.
And why was it given to the central government?
Well,
If you have come across debates on it, so is there any reason for giving it exclusively to the central government?
I think the idea was for the uniform implementation of all policies. Say for instance, somebody comes up with a diphtheria vaccination program or a pulse polio abhiyan. Now for that you need to identify as to how many of these children are below 5 years of age.
Right.
And for that statistics would be used for the purposes of identifying your target and then using or devising suitable means and mechanisms to contain that epidemic. Now, if within a period of 10 years and another 10 years you are able to identify that, all right, say out of back in those days 25 states, 10 states are free of polio, but 15 states still have it, then you would know where to target your next batch of
The
policies
policy,
or
yeah, okay.
implementation.
So let's come to the contentious debate over the caste-based survey in Bihar. So, Bihar government has gone ahead with the survey. The data is already in the public domain. The challenge is pending in the Supreme Court. So, if you could just explain what the debate is all about and why have the petitioners questioned the Bihar government's authority to carry out this kind of a survey, and if it can be equated to a census or not.
There lies a crucial distinction in the word census and survey.
Okay, then we can touch that later. Let's first talk about the debate then. Yeah.
So the debate also stems from the definition, the explanation which is sought to be given to each of these expressions. Very simply put, Bihar government comes out with a particular survey. They call it caste-based survey. The nomenclature itself says that this survey is only going to deal with the caste of an individual.
Right.
The set of questionnaires are almost similar to the ones which are asked in census. But let me also give you a slight context to it. Now you would recollect that after 2011, it was only to 2021 when the next census was supposed to happen. I was going through one of the notifications dated 13th or 17th March of 2020, which had advised which in fact said that we are going to come out with full swing. We have to do X, Y, Z, appoint commissioners, officers, etc., etc. But of course, due to outbreak of COVID, that exercise could not be carried out. Now, the state government stand was that since we don't have any data from the central government, let's collect our own data. And this exercise was conducted under another act of 2008, right? And not under the Census Act. Now that notification also is purportedly issued under the Collection of Survey Act, Statistics Act of 2008. Now, interestingly, when this questionnaire came out, the petitioners, which is Youth for Equality, decided to challenge it by way of a writ petition, and they also managed to persuade the bench to order a stay on the collection. Now this order was on 4th of May. After that, on 1st of August, very recently, the Patna High Court said that the three questions which were raised in the petition stood answered in favor of the state. The first question was, A, is the state government even competent to roll out such a scheme? B, if they are so competent, then is it proportionate to the laudable objective that the state seeks to achieve, namely compilation, and whether this objective of compilation of data on the basis of caste dynamics is even permissible or constitutionally valid. And third was that in so doing, whether the effect would be negation of right of privacy of an individual.
Right.
And of course, they cited Justice Puttaswamy's case and Nalsa also, because even transgenders were sought to be, they were asked to reveal
their own
gender,
identity. Yeah.
their own identity. Now, all those questions were answered in favor of the state. The contention primarily by the petitioners was that census can only be carried out by the central government under Section 3 of the Census Act. No other authority has the power to carry it out, notwithstanding the change of nomenclature. Call it what you may, it in a sense is a census. And that can only originate because the central government draws its powers from entry 69 list 1.
Yeah, exclusive powers, that's what you explained. Yeah.
And since this matter neither falls within the state list nor falls within the concurrent list, the state has no business to carry that out. The state instead relied on Section 9 of the Collection of Statistics Act of 2008 to say, sorry, we have complete competence. What perhaps was not argued or not considered was a proviso. The first proviso itself says that you can carry out that exercise provided it does not fall within the exclusive domain of the central government.
Yeah.
Because if it does, then you are out. And that is something that, of course, will be a subject matter of
But you know,
litigation.
Bihar had actually differentiated between a survey and a census.
Yes.
They said this is not equivalent to a census.
That's right.
As you pointed out, it was just a compilation. So when they say it was just a compilation, what is the meaning of this sentence? I mean, in the sense, are they only collecting the data and that's it? Or do they want to use the data for something else?
Well, collection, they said that collection is their prerogative because the Act allows for it.
Right.
I can collect it, but can I use it is a question.
Right.
Use of that information.
Because census is for a very specific objective.
That's right.
And the objective, as you pointed out earlier, is that, you know, the government, so that the government, it basically lays down the foundation for the government to come out with its own welfare policies, you know, and have a target audience for it. So that, you know, that target audience is identified through the census. What is the objective behind this survey? And if you could also highlight a little bit about this act, this is the Statistic Act which we are talking about. What is this act about?
Also, Nipun, if you could just talk about the Census Act 1948 individually as well as vis-a-vis the Collection of Statistics Act against each other, just for our viewers to understand what's the difference, what either of the laws allow.
Taking first the Census Act of 1948, it defines what a census is. It also defines particular officers who would be deployed. Now, Section 3 of the Census Act is very important because it says that the prerogative or the obligation to carry out the census only and solely vests in the central government.
Right.
It also, there was also a very crucial amendment of 1994 to the Act, which took away all state government's prerogatives in the matter, leaving it or leaving the question census to be solely determined by the central government. Now, it also says that the central government will appoint officers for the purpose of carrying out the census commissioner and such number of other officers who would carry out. District magistrates have been conferred powers. Under Section 7, it's very interesting because the central government in exercise of that power can also requisition any property, movable or immovable, to carry out that particular census. any person who is asked a question must truthfully answer the question or suffer risk of a fine or an imprisonment. Therefore, you are obligated as a participant to give correct and accurate information. To answers to the particular officer. The powers which have been conferred to the central government is so huge that it basically goes to the extent of saying that any officer, any innkeeper, any hotelier, any person can be requisitioned for the purposes of this service. You have to leave everything aside and carry out this survey. Under section 7, there are also particulars which have been mentioned. There are penalties which are earmarked. Then it says that the applicability of other laws is of course not barred, but you can use that information, and this information collected shall not be a public record.
Okay.
So this information is incapable of being given under RTI. This information is incapable of being used for the purpose other than what it is meant for. Because it deals with the sensitive and personal data, if I were to employ the terminology of today's standards.
It's basically an exclusive central government property.
Absolutely. In fact, it says that this has to be maintained with utmost confidentiality also. Right? And therefore, this statistics, the numbers which come out or emanate from this statistics shall be used for the purposes of collation of data, which then will be synthesized for the purposes of implementation of different policies.
Right.
So to that limited extent, the statistical division alone will retain this.
Okay.
And it is the statistical division which will churn out the relevant data. Now all of that data will be used for different welfare legislative schemes. So this in short is the entire scheme of this Census Act. Now Collection of Statistics Act of 2008 by and large mirrors the scheme of the Census Act. It is not to say that it has something really in addition to what the Census Act contemplates. But what it does have is rigors which are imposed by the Census Act. In a way, it steers clear of Census Act. It says that whatever is exclusive prerogative of the central government, you can't touch upon it. But what it does in addition thereto is under section 9 of this particular act, it gives powers to even the state government or an agency of the union or the government of the union territory to collect that data.
And that's the defense that Bihar government has now taken.
The Bihar government says that we are exercising our powers under section 3, right, with section 9 of this Collection of Statistics Act of 2008. And therefore we are not strictly carrying out a census but a survey. So with what you call, as the petitioners have argued, with a mere change in nomenclature, the state is trying to do something which it was not permitted to do.
Under the Census Act.
Under the Census Act. Because if you look at the questionnaires, they are almost similar. Now, one could argue and play the devil's advocate on behalf of the other party and say that since caste was never contemplated within the Census Act, therefore I can ask this question. Nobody stops me from asking this question. But the state went a step further and relied on the decisions of the Supreme Court in Indira Sahni judgment. Now, Indira Sahni and Pradeep Sharma and 87 Supreme Court has very clearly carved out that if the state wishes to give any specific benefits or rolls out a reservation policy in the favor of say SC, ST, OBC, then it has to be backed by empirical data. And that data will only come if you carry out a survey. And therefore the state argued that for the purpose of justifying whether this particular schemes that we want to roll out in future, we need this data, and therefore we were well within our rights to carry out that exercise, and therefore as a sequitur we are competent to do so. Now the argument against that is that empirical data for what? Empirical data to establish whether you are SC, ST or OBC.
Right.
Then what is the question of asking what caste are you from general community?
You know, that's exactly what I wanted to also understand. You have of course pointed out in detail about the Census Act. and as we've discussed earlier, there is a reason for it, because the central government needs to have that kind of data. The Central Statistics Act of 2008, which permits state governments to also acquire similar nature, in the sense data of the similar nature. What is this particular act meant for, which the Bihar government is citing as a defense to collect caste, to carry out the caste-based survey?
See, I think the purpose of this particular act, collection of statistics, was also for the purposes of the state government to carry out their policies, because not all policies will only flow from the central government.
Right.
Now, one would also argue that if the statistics which are obtained from the national census data is visible to the
Right.
state governments
Exactly.
also, then
Yes.
there is no point or no necessity to have
Having
this,
your own data.
having your own data to carry out that particular survey. Also, it would be a futile exercise, because it would result in, say, doubling of data. And thirdly, it will also be a drain on the financial portfolio of a particular state. So why have this exercise? Now, nobody questioned, because Bhadra, the subject matter of this petition was only that this particular exercise was invalid. I mean, very unsolicited advice. Somebody ought to have challenged the virus of these provisions also,
Right.
if
Right.
they wanted to, in fact, carry it out. But since a mere collection of data is in no way harmful, therefore, on the face of it, the objective is very laudable.
Right.
Now, if one state decides to carry out an exercise to find out the actual caste,
It can
even
be
within
different.
general categories or SC or ST or OBC, then I think that sort of defeats the objective of this statute as well. Because this statute, in so many words, has refrained exactly this. Whether it be the first proviso to section 3, it says you cannot carry out a census, or even section 32, which says that this act overrides other laws, but there's an exception even in that particular provision, says except any census carried out under the Census Act.
Yeah.
So
In fact, the central government has gone ahead. They have not opposed the idea, but they have also said that this survey is equivalent to a census,
That's right.
and a census under the law can only be carried out by the central government. Yeah, but they of course have not taken a very definitive stand as of now, and the matter is pending in the court. So we'll have to really see whether this kind of a survey can be equated to a census or not.
Now, if one looks at, the classical test is form versus substance. Put both the questionnaires, see which one is which and how similar are they. It is that easy to find out that in the heart of it, barring those 2-3 questions,
Right.
which will point out to somebody's caste, is the rest of the data almost similar or identical? If that, then the intention would be obvious. But the petitioners argue that this is also an invasion of somebody's privacy. Now, of course, after the Puttaswamy line of judgments, we know that informational privacy and digital privacy is very, very inherent part of that larger genus or species, genus of privacy. Now, the difficulty is that when you ask somebody to give that information, non-disclosure of that information under the 2000 Act also becomes punishable. So now a person is bound to yeah, so after the Puttaswamy judgment, we understand that we also have an inherent right to digital privacy and informational privacy. Now, this particular provision or this particular census defeats these two aspects, because a person is involuntarily being asked to give that information. Because if he fails to give that information, and if this exercise is in fact being carried out under the 2008 Act, then the person may run the risk of a penalty, which is contemplated in the provision.
With this, we've reached the end of this episode. In this episode, we discussed about the Census Act 1948. We also spoke about the Bihar caste survey, which is in legal trouble in the Supreme Court. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what the Supreme Court thinks about it. Thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.